The first thing people noticed wasn't the clown. It was the smile. Wide. Perfect. Frozen in place like it had been carved into reality itself. Teeth too clean. Too even. And somehow closer than it should have been. They said clowns were supposed to blink. Laugh. Move. But this one didn't need to. Children began complaining that it watched them from places where no one should be, storm drains, dark hallways, the corner of reflections. Every time they looked back, the smile was still there. Unchanged. Waiting. As if it had never left, because it never had. Adults laughed it off at first. Until they noticed something unsettling. Whenever they blinked, the smile didn't. Not once. One man swore he saw it in his bathroom mirror, hovering behind him. When he spun around, nothing was there. But the reflection still showed it, grinning wider now, as if amused by the confusion. People started disappearing after that. Not suddenly. Slowly. Piece by piece. First their dreams. Then their memories. Then the ability to remember why they were afraid. The last thing anyone ever recalled about them was this. They had looked back at the smile. And this time, it smiled more. Because some horrors don't chase you. They wait. And once you notice them, they never blink again. It began quietly, the way the most dangerous things always do, without screams or sirens or warnings. In the town, there were no sudden disappearances at first, no missing posters flapping on telephone poles, no police tape. There was only a rumor, passed between children in whispers, the kind of whisper that sticks to the back of your neck long after you pretend not to believe it. They said there was a smile in places where faces didn't belong. Not a whole clown at first. Just the smile. It appeared at the edge of vision, never directly in front of anyone. In the dark curve of a storm drain after the rain had washed the streets clean. In the narrow gap beneath a basement door where the light should have been empty. In the warped reflection of a shop window after sunset, floating where no mouth should have been. The smile was always the same, wide, stretched too far, as if someone had taken a human grin and pulled it outward until it hurt. The teeth were unnaturally white, catching whatever little light existed, glowing faintly like bone under moonlight. Children were the first to notice because children still looked into places adults had trained themselves to ignore. They stared into drains, under beds, behind curtains, into reflections that felt wrong. A boy named Lucas claimed he saw it while walking home from school, peering up at him from a puddle on the road. He said the face attached to it was blurry, like it was underwater, but the smile was sharp and clear, more real than the rest of the world. When he leaned closer, heart hammering, the smile didn't move. It didn't widen. It didn't fade. It simply waited. At night, the stories multiplied. One girl said she saw it in her closet, hovering just behind her hanging clothes, teeth gleaming between coats like a secret. Another said it watched her from the hallway while her parents slept, the smile hanging at adult height, far too high to belong to anyone crouching. They all described it the same way without ever comparing notes, which unsettled the adults far more than the idea of a clown itself. Kids lie, but they don't usually lie in perfect agreement. Parents blamed imagination, movies, the internet. They told their children not to stare into drains, not to scare themselves with shadows. Yet even they began to feel it, a strange pressure when passing certain places, an instinctive urge to look away. The town had always had old infrastructure, cracked sidewalks, rusted grates, mirrors clouded with age. Now those things felt like open mouths. Waiting mouths. The smile never announced itself. It didn't lunge or laugh or make a sound. It simply appeared, already smiling, as though it had been smiling long before anyone noticed. People later tried to remember the first time they saw it clearly, and failed. It was as if the memory slid away the harder they reached for it, leaving only the sensation of unease, the certainty that it had been there longer than it should have been. One evening, a teacher walking home glanced into a storefront window and froze. For a fraction of a second, behind her own reflection, the smile hovered where her mouth should have been, stretching wider than her face could ever manage. She turned sharply, heart racing, expecting a prank, a mask, anything explainable. The street was empty. When she looked back at the glass, her reflection was normal again, but she could not shake the feeling that something had stepped back rather than disappeared. What disturbed people most wasn't fear, but recognition. The smile felt familiar, like something half-remembered from childhood nightmares or stories told too early at sleepovers. It wasn't just a grin, it was an invitation, a promise of attention. People who saw it reported the same strange thought creeping into their minds unbidden: it wants me to look longer. As though the smile fed not on screams or blood, but on awareness itself. Those who tried to stare it down found it impossible to focus on anything else. The world around the smile blurred, sounds muffled, time stretching thin. One man claimed he stood over a storm drain for what felt like seconds, only to look up and realize an hour had passed and the streetlights had turned on. He couldn't remember what he'd been thinking, only that the smile had been very close by the end, closer than it had any right to be. Still, there were no attacks. No bodies. Just sightings, growing more frequent, more confident. The smile began appearing higher, not just at ground level but in upper windows, mirrors mounted on walls, glossy screens turned black. It adapted, learning where eyes lingered. It appeared when people were alone, when there was no one else to confirm what they were seeing, no one to reassure them that it wasn't real. Eventually, someone noticed the detail that would change everything. A child, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring into the darkness beneath it, saw the smile and squeezed his eyes shut in terror. When he opened them again, the smile was still there, exactly the same, unbroken, unaltered. He blinked again, slowly this time, deliberately. The smile did not blink back. It never had eyes to close, yet it watched him all the same, aware of each flutter of his lashes, patient, endless, as if blinking were a weakness it had long since evolved beyond, as if it had been waiting for someone, anyone, to finally understand that once you notice the smile, it has already noticed you, and it has all the time in the world to stay exactly where it is, smiling, watching, waiting just beyond the edge of where you wish you could stop looking at first. People dismissed the detail about blinking as something small, almost laughable, a trick of fear exaggerating memory. Everyone knew that when you were scared, your brain filled gaps with nonsense. But the idea refused to go away. It lingered, scratched at the inside of thoughts, resurfaced at inconvenient moments. Someone would blink while brushing their teeth and suddenly feel watched. Someone else would blink at a red light and feel a strange, irrational relief when nothing appeared in the rearview mirror. Blinking, once automatic and meaningless, became noticeable. Heavy. Those who had seen the smile began testing it without admitting what they were doing. A woman walking her dog past a storm drain slowed her steps, pretending to adjust the leash, glancing down just long enough to confirm it was there. The smile waited in the darkness like a cut in the world. She blinked quickly, instinctively, expecting the image to flicker or vanish like an afterimage from a bright light. When she opened her eyes, it was unchanged. Same curve. Same teeth. Same impossible stillness. Her stomach dropped, not because it was still there, but because it felt aware of the blink itself, as if it had counted it. People started noticing the asymmetry. Humans blink to stay alive. Eyes dry out, muscles strain, vision blurs. Blinking is a weakness, a reset button we can't disable. The smile didn't share that weakness. It didn't need eyes, yet it never lost focus. It didn't flinch, didn't stutter, didn't reset. It existed in a constant state of attention that felt unnatural, like a predator that never slept and never needed to. Children were the ones who articulated it best, though adults hated the way they said it. They didn't say the smile couldn't blink. They said it wouldn't. As if blinking were a choice it had already decided against. As if closing itself off from the world, even for a fraction of a second, was something it refused to do. A boy named Aaron described it to his mother after waking up screaming. He said he'd been lying in bed, staring at the dark, when the smile appeared at the foot of his mattress, hovering just above the floor. He watched it for a long time, too afraid to move. His eyes burned. Tears gathered. Finally, he squeezed them shut. When he opened them again, the smile was closer, not by distance, but by presence, sharper somehow, clearer, like it had used the moment of blindness to adjust itself. He told her it felt like cheating. That word spread. Cheating. The smile cheated at the rules of being seen. People began to understand that looking away didn't make it leave. Blinking didn't interrupt it. In fact, blinking seemed to give it something. Several people described the same sensation, independently, without ever speaking to one another. Every blink made the smile feel heavier, more solid, like it was settling into place. Not moving forward, not growing larger, just becoming harder to deny. One man tried an experiment he would later regret. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror late at night, lights off, just enough moonlight leaking in through the window to reflect his outline. He waited. The smile appeared behind his reflection, floating where his mouth should have been. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. He forced himself not to blink. Seconds passed. Then minutes. His eyes burned, vision swimming, but the smile remained perfectly stable, unaffected by the strain. When he finally blinked, it was from pain, not fear. When he opened his eyes, he felt an overwhelming certainty that the smile had been closer during the blink, not physically, but mentally, as if it had leaned in while he was gone. After that, people stopped trusting their own eyelids. They held them open too long, stared until headaches bloomed, until tears ran freely, because blinking felt like surrender. Insomnia spread through the town. Dark circles appeared under eyes. People drank more coffee, stared at screens longer than they should have, anything to avoid that brief moment of blindness. Doctors blamed stress. Optometrists warned of damage. No one listened. It became clear that the smile understood the rhythm of human blinking better than humans did themselves. It appeared more often when people were tired, when blinks were slower, heavier. It appeared in places where eyes naturally relaxed, bathrooms, bedrooms, long empty hallways. Some swore it timed itself, showing up just as eyelids drooped, as if it knew that exhaustion made the blink unavoidable. The most disturbing realization came when someone noticed that the smile seemed to react not to sight, but to attention. One woman claimed she felt it watching her even when she wasn't looking directly at it. She sat on her couch, television on, eyes fixed forward, yet she could feel the smile behind her, hovering just outside her field of view. She blinked, and the sensation intensified, like a pressure behind the eyes, a silent acknowledgement. That was when the fear shifted. It was no longer about seeing the smile. It was about being seen by something that never lost sight of you. Blinking became an act of vulnerability, a tiny death repeated hundreds of times a day. People began to wonder how long the smile had been watching them before it ever appeared. Whether it had always been there, waiting for the moment they noticed it, the moment they realized that perception was a one-sided exchange. The idea spread quietly, infectiously. Maybe the smile didn't need eyes because it borrowed yours. Maybe every blink was an opening, a fraction of a second where something else looked through, measured, learned. People reported flashes of thought slipping in during blinks, fleeting impressions that weren't memories or imagination. A sense of amusement. Patience. Hunger, not for flesh, but for focus. By then, everyone understood the rule, even if they never said it out loud. You could close your eyes, you could turn away, you could pretend nothing was there, but the smile would never return the courtesy. It would never blink back. It would keep watching through every darkness you created for yourself, through every involuntary flutter of your eyelids, waiting for the moment you realized that the only thing keeping it at a distance was the fragile illusion of control you felt when your eyes were open, and that illusion grew thinner with every blink you couldn't stop, every second you spent knowing that something out there remained perfectly still, perfectly smiling, perfectly awake, long after your eyes begged for rest. The idea of using mirrors started as a desperate attempt to regain control. If the smile could appear anywhere, if it could exist at the edge of vision and survive every blink, then perhaps reflections could expose it, pin it down, force it to obey rules. Mirrors were supposed to show the truth, even when the truth was ugly. People told themselves that if they could see the smile clearly in glass, then it would have to belong to something real, something bound to shape and space. The first experiments were accidental. A woman washing her hands late at night glanced up and saw the smile hovering over her shoulder in the mirror. She spun around, pulse roaring in her ears, expecting to see a figure behind her. The bathroom was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the smile was still there, floating exactly where it had been, detached from any face, its teeth bright against the dull reflection of tiles and shadows. Her own mouth trembled, but the smile did not mimic her. It remained unchanged, indifferent to her movements, as if it were layered on top of reality rather than reflected by it. Word spread quickly, though no one wanted to admit they were part of it. Mirrors became tools, then traps. People began checking them obsessively, not just bathroom mirrors, but car mirrors, shop windows, phone screens turned dark. The smile did not appear in every reflection, which somehow made it worse. It chose its moments. It appeared when people were alone, when there was no one else to confirm that it was there, when doubt could rock quietly into fear. Someone noticed something that chilled the town more than any sighting before. In certain reflections, the smile appeared without the person standing in front of the mirror at all. A teenager filming herself on her phone turned the camera toward a blank hallway behind her, joking about the rumors. When she played the video back later, her laughter cut off halfway through. In the dark screen, before the camera adjusted, the smile was already there, suspended in the black like a scar, long before her own reflection faded in. It had been waiting for the glass to notice it. Mirrors began to show contradictions. In some, the smile lagged behind movements, remaining fixed when reflection shifted. In others, it appeared closer than it should have been, its teeth too large, its curve too wide, as if depth meant nothing to it. One man covered every mirror in his house with sheets, only to see the smile curve faintly through the fabric, stretching the cloth as though the grin had weight, as though it could press itself into things not meant to hold mouths. The most terrifying discovery came when someone tried to photograph it deliberately. A group gathered in an abandoned storefront after dark, courage borrowed from numbers. They positioned a mirror against a wall, lights off, cameras ready. When the smile appeared, hovering in the glass, several phones captured it at once. But when they reviewed the images, the photos disagreed. In some, the smile was centered. In others, it was higher, or wider, or subtly different, as if it had adjusted itself for each lens. In one photo, there was no smile at all, only a faint distortion in the glass, like heat rising from asphalt. The idea settled in slowly and terribly. The smile did not reflect. It interpreted. People began to understand that mirrors weren't showing the smile as it was. They were showing how it wanted to be seen. Reflections weren't passive surfaces, they were negotiations. The smile used them to test perception, to slip around expectations. It could exist in reflection without occupying the space in front of it, could grin from glass while leaving the air untouched. It was there and not there, present only where reality folded back on itself. Some claimed the smile was more vivid in mirrors than in the real world. Brighter. Sharper. As if reflections gave it permission to be more complete. A woman described seeing the faint suggestion of eyes above the grin in a mirror, hollow shapes that never appeared when she turned around. Another swore she saw gums flex slightly, as though the smile was straining against an invisible face, eager to step out of the glass if it could. Fear changed shape after that. People stopped trusting reflections of themselves. They avoided eye contact with their own images, afraid that lingering too long might invite something else to linger with them. Mirrors were removed, shattered, turned to the wall. Shop windows were covered. Even polished metal made people uneasy. Anything that bounced the world back at itself felt dangerous. But destroying mirrors didn't stop the smile. It adapted. It appeared in puddles, in glossy screens, in the curved reflection of a spoon. One man claimed he saw it in his own eyes, reflected in the dark pupil of the person he was speaking to, a tiny crescent grin nested inside another human's gaze. That was when people realized the test had never been about glass at all. Mirrors had only revealed the truth too clearly to ignore. The smile did not belong to bodies. It did not occupy space the way people did. It existed wherever perception doubled back on itself, wherever something looked at itself being seen. Reflection was its doorway, not its prison. It could appear without entering, watch without arriving. Those who stared too long into mirrors reported strange effects afterward. Their reflections felt delayed, slightly off, as though the timing between movement and image had been disturbed. Some noticed subtle changes in their own smiles, their mouths curving a fraction wider than intended, muscles tightening in unfamiliar ways. They laughed less, afraid of how much their teeth showed. Eventually, a quiet consensus formed, unspoken but understood. If you saw the smile only in front of you, there was still hope that it might be an illusion, a trick of shadow and fear. But if you saw it in a mirror when nothing stood behind you, that meant it had crossed a line you couldn't uncross. It meant the smile didn't need a place in the world to exist. It only needed a surface that promised truth and delivered distortion, a surface that reflected reality just long enough for something else to borrow its shape, to grin back at you from a place where nothing should be, proving that whatever was smiling had never been standing behind you at all but had always been inside the space between you and your reflection, waiting patiently for the moment you trusted the mirror enough to look closely and let it show you that the smile was not a visitor, but a resident of the act of seeing itself at some point. Curiosity curdled into defiance. Fear had rules, and people learned them quickly. Don't stare, don't blink too slowly, don't trust reflections. But rules invite testing, especially when terror becomes routine. There were those who believed the smile could be confronted, that attention was a weapon rather than a weakness. They told themselves that if they looked directly at it, truly looked, they might strip it of its power. The idea spread quietly, carried by the same stubborn hope that makes people touch hot stoves twice just to be sure. The first to try did so alone. He stood in his hallway late at night, lights off, knowing exactly where the smile liked to appear. When it manifested, hovering at the far end like a wound in the dark, he didn't look away. His heart thundered, his hands shook, but he forced himself to focus on the curve of its teeth, on the impossible stillness of it. He waited for something to happen. For a lunge. For a sound. For anything. The smile remained unchanged. After several minutes, he felt a strange calm settle over him, heavy and unnatural. He told himself he was winning. The next morning, he couldn't remember his neighbor's name. At first, the memory loss seemed trivial. Names slipped. Appointments were forgotten. Passwords stopped working. People laughed it off as stress, lack of sleep, too much fear poisoning the mind. But the pattern was undeniable. Those who deliberately confronted the smile, who tried to challenge it with sustained attention, began losing pieces of themselves. Not randomly. Selectively. A woman who stared at it in her bathroom mirror for nearly 10 minutes later realized she couldn't remember her childhood home. The image of it was simply gone, like a photograph burned away, leaving only the knowledge that something used to be there. Another man forgot the face of his wife, though he still recognized her voice. He cried when he heard her speak, unable to explain why the sound hurt so much. It became clear that the smile did not punish instantly. It collected. The longer someone looked, the more it took, and it was meticulous about what it removed. It didn't erase recent memories first. It went for anchors. Names. Faces. Places tied to identity. The things people used to reassure themselves that they were real. Those affected described the same sensation during confrontation, a feeling like pressure behind the eyes, as if something were gently but insistently pressing inward. Thoughts grew slippery. Concentration frayed. Some reported a faint ringing, others a warm numbness spreading across the forehead. Through it all, the smile never changed. It did not gloat. It did not grow larger. It simply endured, as if endurance itself were the act. The most disturbing accounts came from those who tried to speak while looking at it. Words failed them. Sentences unraveled mid-thought. One woman opened her mouth to scream and instead laughed, a thin, broken sound she didn't recognize as her own. She later said it felt like the smile was rearranging her from the inside, loosening things, deciding what was worth keeping. Doctors found nothing wrong. Brain scans were normal. Cognitive tests showed inconsistencies that couldn't be explained. People could recite complex facts yet forget their own birthdays. They could remember the layout of streets but not why they cared about where those streets led. The mind was intact, but its contents had been selectively thinned, like a bookshelf with only the spines removed. Rumors spread that the smile fed on recognition, that it consumed the mental effort required to confront it. Looking away was not safety, it was simply delay. Looking directly was an invitation to trade something essential for the illusion of control. Those who had lost memories described a hollow relief afterward, a sense that something heavy had been lifted. Fear dulled. Panic softened. The world felt flatter, easier to endure. That frightened people more than the losses themselves. Families noticed changes before the afflicted did. A father forgot the nickname he'd used for his daughter since she was born. A sister failed to recognize a childhood photograph featuring herself. They smiled more, spoke less, seemed oddly content, as though the sharp edges of their emotions had been sanded down. When asked what they remembered about the night they confronted the smile, their answers were vague, unfocused. Some couldn't remember seeing it at all, only the urge to look, and the certainty that doing so had been important. It became apparent that the smile didn't want bodies or lives. It wanted space. Space in the mind. Every memory it took created a quiet hollow, a place where fear no longer reached, where resistance softened. Those hollows felt peaceful, and peace made people careless. A few went back willingly, convinced that if they just looked again, the fog would lift, the missing pieces would return. Instead, more disappeared. People tried to warn each other, but warnings require shared understanding, and understanding relies on memory. The more the smile was confronted, the harder it became to explain why it shouldn't be. Notes were written only to be read by people who couldn't remember why they'd written them. Recordings were made, voices trembling with urgency, later dismissed by their own creators as overreactions to stress. Eventually, the town learned the unspoken law, do not look back. Not because the smile would chase you, but because it would stay exactly where it was, letting you approach, letting you spend yourself against it. Looking away preserved the self. Looking back offered it up, piece by piece, in exchange for the quiet numbness that followed. Those who lost the most became strangely serene. They no longer flinched at reflections. They blinked without fear. Some even smiled more, though their smiles lacked warmth, stretching just a little too wide. When asked what frightened them now, they struggled to answer. Fear requires memory, and memory was exactly what the smile took as payment. By the time this was understood, it was too late to stop people from testing it again and again, convinced they could outstare it, outlast it, reclaim what had been taken. Each attempt ended the same way, with someone standing very still, eyes fixed, face slack with concentration, while something unseen counted the seconds, measured the effort, and quietly decided which parts of them would be easiest to remove, leaving behind a person who could still walk and talk and function, but who no longer remembered enough of themselves to understand why they should ever have been afraid of looking back at the smile that never moved, never blinked, and never asked for more. than people were willing to give once they believed that staring directly into it was a form of bravery rather than an act of surrender. Understanding arrived not as a revelation but as an erosion. It seeped in slowly, wearing down certainty until what remained felt fragile and thin. By then, most people no longer asked what the smile was. They asked why it waited. The disappearances of memory, the hollow calm that followed confrontation, the way fear dulled instead of spiked, all of it pointed toward a conclusion no one wanted to accept. The smile was not a predator in the way stories had trained them to expect. It did not chase. It did not need to. It relied on something far more intimate. Attention. Those who still remembered enough began comparing notes, piecing together fragments left behind by people who could no longer explain themselves. The pattern became unmistakable. The smile appeared more vividly to those who thought about it most. It lingered longer for those who feared it deeply. It grew clearer for those who tried to understand it. Awareness strengthened it. Curiosity fed it. Resistance shaped it. The smile was not forcing itself into minds, it was being invited. One man, who had avoided direct confrontation and still retained most of his memories, described the realization in a trembling voice. He said the smile reminded him of a thought you couldn't stop thinking. The more you tried to push it away, the louder it became. The more you examined it, the more real it felt. Eventually, it didn't matter whether the thought was true. It existed simply because you kept returning to it. The smile, he said, was like that, but older, hungrier, and patient beyond human understanding. People began to suspect that the smile had never been bound to a single shape. The clown, the teeth, the curve of the grin, these were compromises, interfaces designed to be noticed. What mattered was not the image, but the act of noticing itself. The smile did not consume flesh or blood. It consumed focus, intention, the inward turning of the mind upon something it could not resolve. That explained why children noticed it first. Children look without filters. They stare. They fixate. Adults, conditioned to glance and move on, had been invisible to it for longer. Only when fear sharpened attention did the smile begin appearing more often to them. It was not drawn to vulnerability alone, but to sustained awareness. To the moment when a mind latched onto it and refused to let go. Those who had lost the most memory seemed closest to understanding, though they could no longer articulate it. They drifted through days with a soft detachment, smiling faintly at things that once would have unsettled them. When asked about the smile, they struggled, not because they were afraid, but because the concept slid off them. They could not hold on to it long enough to feel threatened. In a cruel twist, forgetting had made them safer. This led to a terrifying hypothesis. The smile did not want everyone. It wanted those who could see it clearly. Those who could hold it in their minds, examine it, define it. Those who tried to name it, study it, defeat it. The very act of framing it as an enemy gave it shape and permanence. The smile thrived in the space where thought circled endlessly around a single point. Someone described it as a door that only opened from the inside. Looking back was not a physical act. It was mental. You could avert your eyes and still invite the smile in by replaying it in your thoughts, by wondering where it would appear next, by imagining its teeth in the dark. Each time the mind returned to it, it grew more solid, more present. People who claimed they had never seen it but feared it intensely often began seeing it soon after, as if the anticipation itself had built a place for it to arrive. This reframed everything. The smile did not stalk the town. The town cultivated it. Every warning, every whispered story, every attempt to document or explain it gave it more room. Even efforts to fight it strengthened it, because they required sustained attention. Silence weakened it. Forgetting starved it. Some tried to erase it deliberately. They avoided discussion. They destroyed notes. They trained themselves to redirect their thoughts whenever the image surfaced. Meditation groups formed, not to confront fear, but to let it pass without engagement. The smile appeared less often around them, fainter, less defined. It did not disappear, but it thinned, like a reflection losing clarity. Others couldn't stop themselves. They obsessed. They theorized. They filmed empty rooms and analyzed shadows frame by frame. They stared into mirrors looking for proof. These were the ones who vanished fastest, not physically, but internally. They became empty vessels, calm and compliant, minds cleared of anything that might resist the quiet pull of attention turned inward and offered up. The final realization settled heavily over those still capable of dread. The smile was not an invader from elsewhere. It was a process. A consequence. A thing that emerged when awareness became trapped, when the mind fixated on something unresolved and fed it endlessly. The smile had always existed in potential, waiting for enough focused fear to give it form. It was not watching people. It was being watched into existence. That was why it never blinked. Blinking implied interruption, a break in attention. The smile embodied uninterrupted focus, the unbroken gaze of a mind that could not let go. It mirrored obsession back at those who fixated on it, reflecting their own inability to look away. Those who finally understood stopped asking how to escape it. They asked how to forget it. They learned to let thoughts drift, to resist the urge to revisit the image, to deny it the sustained awareness it needed. For some, this worked. The smile faded into rumor again, into something vague and easily dismissed. For others, it was too late. Once the smile had carved enough space inside a mind, absence felt wrong. Silence felt heavy. Forgetting felt like loss. And so some continued to look back, not out of fear, but out of longing, drawn to the familiar curve, the strange comfort of something that waited without demanding movement, something that existed only when acknowledged, something that rewarded fixation with numbness and quiet, something that had taught them, slowly and patiently, that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones that hunt you in the dark, but the ones that teach you to keep thinking about them, to keep returning to them, to keep the door open from the inside, inviting them deeper each time your attention lingers just a little too long on the idea of a smile that never needed to blink because it had learned that as long as someone was thinking about it, it would never have to go anywhere at all. The night was quiet, but not peaceful. Those who had learned that looking away was never enough, that the real danger lived not in the eyes but in the mind, now carried a different kind of fear. Because forgetting is not a switch you can turn off. Especially when something has slowly woven itself into your thoughts. Sometimes, in the most ordinary moments, they felt it again, a flicker of awareness with no source, a sense that something familiar was just out of reach. Not seen. Not heard. Just known. They began to realize something unsettling. The smile didn't vanish when they stopped seeing it. It lingered in gaps between thoughts, in pauses during conversation, in the brief silence before sleep. It surfaced as a feeling rather than an image, a pressure that suggested there was something they were deliberately not thinking about. And the harder they tried to keep their minds clear, the heavier that absence felt, like a word on the tip of the tongue that refused to be spoken. Some wondered if this was the final trick. That once you understood how it worked, the smile no longer needed to appear. It had already trained you, taught you to monitor your own thoughts, to feel your own attention, to question every moment of silence, every stray idea, every blink of awareness that drifted too close to remembering. Late at night, when the town slept and distractions faded, a few people noticed the same thing. Not a grin in the dark, not teeth in a reflection, but a strange certainty that something was waiting, not in the shadows, but in the next thought they hadn't had yet. As if the smile no longer needed to be seen, only remembered, only anticipated, only almost recalled. And that was when the most disturbing question began to surface, quietly, reluctantly, in the minds of those who still remembered enough to be afraid. If the smile only exists when it's noticed, what happens when you feel it watching, but you can't remember why?